אלוהינו לקיני ברק, אלוהינו לקינה הלל, אלוהינו לקיני גדל, אלוהינו לקיני סעק, אלוהינו לקיני רומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי. אלוהינו לקיני ברת, אלוהינו לקינה הלל, אלוהינו לקיני גדל, אלוהינו לקיני סעק, אלוהינו לקיני רומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי אהיה שערי. אלוהינו לקיני ברת, אלוהינו לקינה הלל, אלוהינו לקיני גדל, אלוהינו לקיני סעק, אלוהינו לקיני רומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי אהיה שערי. מברך ומהלך אלוהינו גדול, אלוהינו מרzeaḥ משתבי לאדון כלאולה יאום לאפקר רע מברך. אלוהינו לקיני ברת, אלוהינו לקינה הלל, אלוהינו לקיני גדל, אלוהינו לקיני סעק, אלוהינו לקיני רומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי אהיה שערי. אלוהינו לקיני ברת, אלוהינו לקינה הלל, אלוהינו לקיני גדל, אלוהינו לקיני סעק, אלוהינו לקיני רומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי אהיה שערי.
Are the black bases like kind
Hey, now we're live. Hello, it's your good friend Colette and Ariel from Ashura's Orchard. We're going to be doing our Marzihu celebration today, and during the music I was just chatting it up with my ma. We had the whole family together. It was really beautiful, and that's what it's all about. Everyone can say hi. Hi. Hello, Ariel.
And whoever else is out there.
Oh, okay. Oh, do you have any words to begin with, Ariel? Or do you want me to start with the ritual?
Not particularly.
Okay. Everyone, come around. Maybe you can make like the big screen, thing, while I do the ritual thing. Do you want to? You have to watch. Can you move the camera to over there, Josh? So yeah, well, I can move it like here. Okay. No, me, not you. Oh.
Is there a candle or something?
You guys can come here.
Okay. Are we background dancers or what?
You're gonna have to go with the flow. This is my holiday. You two on the Marzihu, we, our little society, have gathered here today to pay homage to our beloved ancestors, our beloved begotten who had gone to the land of Sheol in the Aprit. They've become shades that walk upon the earth, and they walk upon us in now, with their little feet, ghost feet. And we You'd think we'd have drunk the wine, but we. Well, we've all had it.
Time to go sneaking. Little ghosty.
Are you on the video?
I was just there.
Okay.
I am.
So we didn't have any wine. Don't take any of that into account. But we didn't drink, but we feasted. We feasted in honor of the ancestors. We set the table for them. We gave them each a slice of fatling, a carving of kid, seared in milk. Okay, and yes, people don't. It's not like children. We don't eat children here.
Goat kid.
But on the Marzihu, we offer, our hearts to those who were lost too soon, or those who found their time, and we honor the life that they lived and the life that we were privileged to be given. Everyone has their time. Everyone goes to the land of freedom in the end. But by the grace of Baal, we have our life, we have our chain, and we continue it through that most joyous of thingies, family. Now, family dance time. Bow, 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 You see, these are beautiful memories, and that was too much fun.
That's a word for it.
Or whatever.
It's actually just his version of Samhain.
Dan said it's my version of Samhain.
It is.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Canaanite Day of the Dead, but I guess this year wasn't super. There were somber parts. We had people that talked about their loved ones and friends, acquaintances, but we accepted them for who they were, their warts and all, and we wished them love.
Yeah, I will admit I don't know a whole lot about the Marzihu. Like I did write a paper, or I forget if I wrote a paper on it or if I was going to, but basically looking at it in comparison to there's this one tradition that I'm actually going to look this up before I speak out of turn and make myself and speak incorrectly, but that just the whole tradition of like ritual feasts in memory of the dead, like that's something you see a lot in the ancient Near East, and beyond that.
Bye, Ma.
Oh, good night, Josh.
Bye, Garth. Bye,
Bye,
Dan.
Josh.
Bye, Jeremy. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you. For sure.
Take care. Let's see. Let's see.
So as I understand it, the Marzihu is very much like that kind of festival. It would have been very important to really important ritual for practice at Ugaritic. One of the main texts actually that we have about the Marzihu actually kind of brings levity into it, which you wouldn't really expect in a Near Eastern text about a ritual involving ancestors and the dead. So all the gods are gathered together at their Marzihu table, essentially. And El, aka God, he gets very drunk. That's relatable. And he starts feeding the dog meat from the table, and his wife Ashura is just scolding him. He's like, "What are you doing feeding dog meat from the table?" and then he kind of like gets so drunk he dies. He goes to the underworld, and then he comes back. So that's the summary of the myth of the Marzihu from Ugaritic.
Interesting.
Which I guess goes to show that people in Ugaritic, scribes in Ugaritic, had a sense of humor. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah. I mean, ever since the year after high school, I've tried to limit the amount of times that I've gone to the underworld and then come back. If you get my drift, only drink a certain amount.
Limit yourself to just 3 or 4 drinks before 9 a.m.
Okay, here I think I found it. Here it is. Here I need to show this first. So wait, is it from the Divine Feast?
Yeah, there's a divine feast in the Baal epic, but this is a different divine feast. Although they're thematically related, a lot of Canaanite texts from Ugaritic, it seems like they have like the main story from the Baal epic, and then they'll have like little spin-offs where they'll kind of, get deeper into it, and a lot of them seem almost like humorous or satirical. Or they kind of flesh out the deeper meaning. Like there was a text, I believe, which fleshes out that famous scene where Baal has sex with a cow.
Ugh.
Because the cow is actually not a cow. The cow is the goddess Anat.
Interesting.
And of course, the birthing of the cow coitus is the figure of Moshe in the Ugaritic text.
Wait, what?
Yeah, Moshe. That's Baal's son's name.
Wait, what?
What? You didn't know that?
I think I remember seeing something like Mashu or something, but where's that actually attested?
I believe that's in the. Well, I think it's. Remember which part? It's. I don't think it's at the part where Baal has just died. I think it's the part where Anat goes looking for Baal in. You know what, you know where, you know why in the land of Deber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Why do we have these running jokes? What's the odds that someone's watching this stream that's seen the previous one?
Who knows?
Do you have it sharing to my channel?
What?
Is this sharing to my channel? I'm just curious.
Oh, you should be able to. You might have to do that manually, but
yeah. I should. Well, yeah, let's see. Don't worry about it. Oof. Let's just enjoy it on your thing.
Yeah.
Maybe you can download it and we can upload it later as a video.
Yeah. So, hey Jevon, how have you been? Happy Marzihu. But yeah, I guess something that I did think was worth mentioning really quickly before I forget. Okay, this is really interesting. So yeah, so there's only 2 instances where Marzihu or the marzeaḥ appears in the Hebrew Bible. But what's interesting is that this one where it's in Jeremiah, it comes
Amos, right.
What?
I was one in Amos and one in
Jeremiah. Yeah. So starting off before that, it says you are not to marry and not to have sons and daughters in this place. Let's see. I'm guessing it's without context. I'm guessing it's referring to Babylon, but at the same time, it could be referring to. Honestly, I'm not sure. But what's interesting, it doesn't. It doesn't say you are not to marry the women of this place. It specifically says you are not to marry in this place. For thus, Adonai concerning said Adonai concerning gods and daughters that may be born in this place, and concerning the mothers who bear them, and concerning the fathers who beget them in this land, they shall die gruesome deaths. Okay, so it's also interesting though, because it's talking about death in the context of what's about to be mentioned. They shall die gruesome deaths. They shall not be lamented or buried. Notice this, lamented. They shall be like dung on the surface of the ground. And then it's interesting, the reference to dung, it'll be relevant later. They shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their corpses shall be food for the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth. For thus said Adonai, do not enter a house of mourning, a Beit Marzeah. It's not house of mourning. It's a house of like happy crying, revelry, mourning cry, feasting cry. But like it's clearly derived from Marzeaḥ, which is a banquet. In a Phoenician context, you also have it. Oh, this is interesting. Marzecha in Aramaic, it's very close to in Ugaritic, which is Marzihu. So it says you are not to enter a Beit Marzeah. Do not go to lament and to what's this? To wail and not to shake, waver, wander, move to and fro, flutter, show grief. Oh, it is interesting. It probably means like you're literally like moving around. It kind of actually reminds me of how some religious Jews, they'll move around when they're praying or when they're sharing a story. Lahem. So, okay, this is interesting. Who is them in this case?
I'm guessing this is reference to. Well, this is in the late First Temple period. So Judah after Israel has fallen, basically. Maybe even but before Judah fell, right?
I think so. Yeah.
The big divide is that the priesthood in Jerusalem is trying to delegitimize any kind of Judean practice outside of their control. They're trying to centralize power around the capital, much in the same way that Akhenaten did, where he's not necessarily believes that none of the other gods exist, but he's trying to centralize all religious worship around his institutions. In Akhenaten, the same thing you'll see with the priesthood in Jerusalem. And you notice that these quote-unquote righteous kings, Josiah, Hezekiah, these are the ones who are in the pocket of the Jerusalem cult, essentially. And therefore exercise the prerogative of the central cult in wiping out alternative systems of worship. And all these prophetic sort of injectives against different religious practices, these are describing basically just what any Judahite person would have done outside of this new reformed Jerusalem-centric cult. So this is what we're looking at. It's like the original Judaism, I guess, the Judaism before Judaism.
Well, Israelite religion.
Sort of, yeah. But it's specifically to Judah, I would say. Well, although it's a context that's universal to Canaanite religion.
Well, I mean, to figure that out, we'd have to figure out which place they're talking about.
Well, it's hard to tell which particular cult site in Judah they're referring to. One of the main ones was at Lachish. And this is one of the places where the political history and religious history kind of intersect, because the Assyrian invasion of Judah in the time of Hezekiah, if I'm not mistaken, they basically waltz through Judah, and they don't encounter any meaningful resistance from the Judahite monarchy. Rather, the Judahite monarchy, they take all the troops and they hold the capital of Jerusalem. But Lachish is a strong enough fortress that they can hold out on their own. And they are the primary religious rivalry, the predominant religious rival in terms of cult to the central cult in Jerusalem, which is why perhaps the central authority of the king, who was essentially under the thumb of the priesthood at this Deuteromistic time, it was not unhappy to see Lachish destroyed, its people carried off, and its temples and cult objects taken back or destroyed.
So this is what I was referring to. Who is the them that it's saying not to condole with or not to shake with? And so I was looking at the different, commentary. And so here Steinsaltz says, "For so said the Lord, do not enter a house of mourning and do not go eulogize." But here it doesn't say this explicitly. It's interpreting who is it saying not to eulogize? The dead. And do not commiserate with them. It's saying the dead are who you're not supposed to be, essentially connecting with. It's interesting.
There's an implication that maybe the dead know something that the priesthood doesn't want people to know, I guess. But I also think that the whole pattern of the history of the development of Judaism out of earlier Israelite religion is out of a dialectic rejection of what the biblical writers, especially in Ezra, called the Am Haaretz, the people of the land, who were the ones who practiced the traditional Israelite/Canaanite religion and did not immediately conform to these practices that were promoted by the central cult in Jerusalem. The one that was actually, I think the interesting thing is there was a significant difference, I think, between cult in Judah and in Israel. But the elites in Israel who were not deported to Assyria, many of them fled specifically to Jerusalem, and they tried to harmonize the accounts. So what the Bible that we get in many senses is an uneven and kind of awkward combination of essentially two different myth sets, two different national myth sets, two different metaphysical myth sets, one of Israel, one of Judah, that the priestly elite in Jerusalem, along with migrants, elite refugees from Samaria.
Interesting. So I wonder, do we find remnants of the Marzihu in other descendant traditions?
It seems like it would be very hard to determine whether these Marzihu traditions are something that's specifically from a Judahite or Israelite context, or just something universal among all Canaanites, all Near Easterners, or just everyone, everywhere. I think there's something about Marzihu that speaks to a psychological way of interacting with the dead, because it's not something exclusive to a Near Eastern context. I always describe it as Canaanite Day of the Dead. To put it into context, especially in Arizona, people understand that, which implies that this traditional Mexican Nahua, dead tradition, you couldn't possibly be geographically further from Canaan almost, but yet they have very, very similar traditions. And I think this is just a very, very ancient, inherent kind of religious ritual that's absolutely universal among everyone, or at least originally was. It reminds me of the Roman tradition of funeral clowns. Have you ever heard of funeral clowns?
Vaguely.
So the Romans had this really interesting tradition where there would be different performers you could hire at funerals, and before then you'd coach them, you'd tell them about your loved one, and they would act out the characteristics of the loved one, even exaggerate them. And it would kind of give, you know, the funeral mourners a chance to interact with that loved one more time, to say goodbye or to settle a score or whatever they wanted to do, just to have closure. The idea that we should feel like on a special day that there should be some sort of spiritual transcendence between the mortal realm and, like, say, the immortal realm or the immaterial realm. In Canada, we say aprit, or the netherworld. Or this is something I think, that I had something. Shit. But it comes with the true nature of death, really. Because death is not traumatic, because dying is necessarily painful. It can be painful, but death is really something scary and traumatic because, one, you don't know where you're going, and two, you're leaving all these people behind, and when your loved one dies, you never get to see them again. And I think this arises from a psychological need to be able to communicate with the dead and finish this unfinished business. Oh, there was a really profound one I had. I kind of thought that it's a little bit like the transubstantiation with the Christian story of Jesus. It's a kind of way of turning something inanimate, food specifically. It's no accident that it's food that becomes Jesus. When these festivals are essentially a way of interacting with the dead.
Interesting. And then also the connection with like the underworld or the ground, and the idea that food comes from the ground.
Mm-hmm. So we bury people in the ground, or we cast their ashes over the ground, and then we find, the food that we eat, it comes up from the ground. And the Canaanites were not blind to that. They were not blind to how the ground was where the dead goes, but also the things that give us life come from the earth. That's why Dagon was one of the most significant gods in the Ugaritic pantheon, even though he's kind of brushed over in what versions of myth we have that survived.
And then also, what else? Mot, at least according to Sanchuniathon, was like essentially the first god in the Canaanite tradition. That it's like, how is death the first thing that emerges? It's because death is also life.
Mm-hmm. The most profound thing, actually, about Canaanite religion, or the most pertinent thing, is that it offers an answer to the question of immortality that doesn't require any sort of divine intervention, let's say. Baal overcomes death not through violent battle, although he does battle with Mot in the end. He eventually comes to terms with Mot with a compromise that El settles between the two of them. But Baal overcomes death not through fighting, not through battle, but through life, through lovemaking, and through essentially reproduction, building a family. And it's no accident that Mot challenges Baal during a feast.
I didn't know if you were going to go further with that.
No.
Just going to leave us hanging there.
Well, I figured I'd give you a chance to talk today.
Honestly, I mean, I have to admit this is a bit more of my weak spot because I don't know as much about the Marzihu feast, but I have found some interesting. Where was it? Found some interesting articles. Like, where was I? I literally just saw it before. Here, I'll just read a bit. We can learn more about this feast from Ugaritic texts that link the Rephaim, or the sunken ones, which it's interesting. Sunken, as in, because Rapha can mean like sunken. It can also mean healer. And it's interesting because the idea of those who are sunk into the ground, buried, are also capable of giving healing. It's kind of interesting. But that link the Rephaim to a funerary feast called the Marzeaḥ. According to M. Pope, the name of the feast is probably derived from the root word razach, which means in Arabic to fall down from fatigue or other weakness and remain prostrate without the power to rise. That's Pope M.H. and M.S. Smith, 1994. Probative pontificating in Ugaritic and biblical literature, collected essays, Munster Ugarit Verlag. The goal of the Marzeaḥ feast was to get hammered. Probably the best known reference to the Marzeaḥ feast comes from the Akkadian text found at Rosh Hashanah, 13th century BC. One second. Where is it? In which El gets so drunk he sees an apparition and ends up wallowing in his excrement and vomit. A cup found in the same room as the text illustrates the Marzeaḥ. So is this supposed to be El?
What is supposed to be El in that artwork? Let me zoom in. Take a look. I think it really doesn't make any difference if it's El or not. Let me kind of give you my impression on this. It can be El, but El's function in that myth is as a divine stand-in for, I think, just any human practitioner of this ritual. I think one of the things that surprises people about Canaanite mythology is just how human the gods are. Rather than being somehow, above humanity, they take the form of doing the same sort of rituals that humans have, almost as if, well, there's us and we have our gods, but then the gods have gods above gods, like it's turtles all the way down, to borrow a phrase. I'll just say, there's a god's god.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, why else would that term God of Gods or King of Kings exist? It implies that there is a rank above.
But I think the idea is it's something about understanding that you're not at the absolute top of everything. Because obviously when Baal is resurrected, it's seen as miraculous even by the other gods, even by El himself, God with a capital G. He had to have a vision from somewhere that was beyond their divine realm to be aware of the miraculous resurrection of Baal. And I've heard people interpret it as like a meta divine realm that kind of like defines what is supposed to happen, or even like the Neoplatonic concept of the one. And I think it's no accident that Neoplatonism was very, very popular with the descendants of Canaanites. People like Porphyry and Iamblichus and the like, because it seems so informed by the layered way that I think Canaanite people saw the world, or rather Near Eastern people, Semitic people saw the world.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's probably a linguistic element there. Also, because I mean, even if you look at like Neoplatonism or even certain elements of like Pythagorean tradition, like a lot of these originally do come from further east than Greece.
Yeah. Well, like Neoplatonism is kind of like a combination of, well, Platonism, but much more influence from Pythagoras and from Stoicism, which are traditions that at their root are Semitic traditions. The founder of Stoicism, Zeno, was well known for being a Phoenician, and they're famous in the Western tradition because these are the individuals that interacted with the Greeks, and by accident of history, it's the Greeks whose records survived. But these are like, it seems like penumbras of a much older Semitic and Canaanite, uh, Egyptian and Akkadian and Hurrian philosophical tradition that long predates any Greek involvement in philosophy, and has a lot of depth to it as well.
Yeah, and what I find kind of interesting is there is a way in which you could read these, quote unquote, and again, because of the whole idea of like what we mean when we say God is very different from what ancient peoples meant. And again, it's not because it's like not the same, but just because there are nuances that we don't use anymore. But but it does make me think of this whole idea of kind of similar to Hinduism, how you have this idea of Brahma, but then there's also a bunch of lesser gods that are like not even comparable to the ultimate reality, the ultimate divine reality, but like there's still the acknowledgement of both of them at the same time. And then in that same lens you have certain gods that are seen as bad, certain that are seen as good. And I think that really, if you were to make a comparison in the monotheistic Abrahamic traditions, that would be similar to the angels and demons, and in some cases even like these heroes and figures that end up becoming larger than life, whether that's something like Samson and the clear connections to the sun, like literally Shimshon means little sun. You have you have clear examples like trying to think, it's escaping. Oh, like so there's one where it's not like such a clear example, but like the parallels that exist between David and Demuzid, and like even the like similarities in the name, as well. I'm trying to think. There's another one that's oh well. I mean, I think the biggest explanation, or wait, where was I going with this? Sorry, I got a bit scatterbrained. That oh right. I mean, even just look at it. Shamgar ben Anat. You have a hero, a judge of Israel, who his name is Shamgar. He's actually very similar to Samson. He ends up using, I think, is it a ox goad or like a donkey jaw or something to beat a bunch of his enemies to death. But the point is his parent, because the thing is, this is what's really interesting. You have this both in Arabic and in Hebrew, but you have the terms like abu and im, or what's the term in Arabic, like it's abu and right?
Yeah, you can say like
yeah. So you have abu and and then you have ibn and was it ibn? Yeah, bint. Yeah. So, but notice this: neither ibn or bint. It doesn't tell you whether the name that you're referring to is your father or your mother. Now, because of tradition, but I mean, like traditionally, it would be you'd be referred to as the son of your father, right? But
it would always be the more important one, and because most societies were very misogynistic, it would almost always be the father. But sometimes it would be the mother if the mother was a more important figure.
So yeah, I mean, like there's literally an example here where here, let me pull it up. Shamgar. I mean, and what's fitting is that his typology even matches that of Anat. Let's see, what is this? Hero kings give ear, O potentates. I will sing. Will sing to God. Will him the eternal, the God of Israel, O God, when you came forth from Seir, advanced from the country of Edom, the earth trembled, the heavens dripped, yea, the clouds dripped water, the mountains quaked because of God. What? Yon sign? What? I don't even know what that's saying. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anat, in the days of Yael, caravans ceased. Now, what's interesting is Yael also fits the typology of Anat. Like she literally ends a general by putting a tent peg through his head. Let's see. Okay, notice this. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anat, it's talking about in these days. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anat, it's saying deliverance ceased in Israel. So notice this. It's basically implying that something was happening. And again, this is being written from a certain perspective, but essentially that there was something wrong happening. And that's why it's, why it ceased. And it's basically implying that Deborah was the one who turned it around. But notice here, when they chose new gods, the thing, though, is that what does that mean? Because if they had been worshiping that since ancient time, it's one of those things that it's tricky, because if you read it from this perspective, you're going to be given, 100% this is what was happening and this stuff was new. But in a lot of ways, it's actually very similar to the notion in Islam, how like Islam has existed since Adam and it just got corrupted. And so that's why it had to be reintroduced by Muhammad.
Yeah, that's the irony. It's like the Muslims think that the Bible was corrupted to be more polytheistic when it was quite the opposite. Actually, the Bible, they systematically removed the polytheistic references as much as they thought that they could get away with, or it's quite the opposite.
So look at this. So it's talking about the leaders of Israel, and it says they ride on atonot, on donkeys. Like just the well, and not even that, because there's a chamor also means donkey. Aton means a she ass. It means a she donkey.
Yeah, so like what Asherah would ride on.
Yeah. So like it's very clear that even within this, anti-polytheistic text, there are notions that parallel with it. And the thing is, whether someone wants to say that it's because there is a connection, or whether they want to say it's because it's a shared cultural motif, like at the end of the day, I think it's kind of hard to say for certain, even though it's kind of like, I don't think it's one or the other, if that makes any sense. Also, apparently, and I mean, it just goes kind of to show how the mythology and like the barriers between different cultures were very lax. Apparently, I need to find a source for this, but apparently there was, I don't know when the earliest reference to this was, but where people were trying to say that the House of Barca was connected to Barak. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's just something that people in modernity said because they noticed the shared etymology.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very, 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 very common. Given how many times thunderbolts have come up in the Greco-Roman tradition for different rulers, as titles of different rulers, I don't think it's at all difficult to accept that independently in the Semitic tradition there would be multiple with that.
Yeah.
For example,
Mhm.
yeah, like in the Hellenistic tradition, there's Ptolemy Koronos, which means thunderbolt. But that title was used pretty frequently by virtue of it being really badass. People in the past were not really super sophisticated. They'd repeat the same things. Oh, one eye, monophthalmos.
Wait. Doesn't that just mean one-eyed?
Yeah, one eye. So, like, people in the past were not very creative. Semitic people doubly so. For example, at least 3 towns in the Levant were named Kadesh. The one in Syria, the one in the Negev, and one in Galilee. So, and of course, there's Qartadash, which is in Tunisia, and then there's the Qartadash, which is in the nowadays Cartagena in Spain. I think people try to read too many connections into different people who have essentially the same name because, frankly, people in the past were not that creative. Not everyone had to have a creative, unique name.
I'm sorry, you're telling me that we're any better now? I'd actually argue we're worse.
No, I'm not saying we're worse. Of course, just
I am.
more people are known from Canaanite sources. Although I will scorn Carthaginians because they make the historian's job so hard. How many Magos, Hanos, Hannibals do we need? You know, too many.
How many
Too
Bob?
many of them.
How
There's
many
too
Bob?
many Hanos.
How many Bobs, Johns, Peters, and Franks do we need?
I haven't seen a lot of Bobs. Occasional John, occasional. I don't know any
Bob
Peter.
the Builder.
Bob the Builder. I mean, like, Bob became a joke name, but then people stopped naming their kids Bob because it was too generic. But in the ancient world, people were proud of how generic their name was. Oh, I'm another Alexander. I'm another Jason. I'm another Achilles. How many? It makes life so hard for historians. Like, and there are many, many times when it's easy to conflate two different historical figures who lived at the same time and had indistinguishable names. And had like kind of like similar vibes going.
Ooh.
There's a limit to the etymological interpretation of history, is what I'm saying.
Here, this would probably be kind of relevant because this addresses the Rephaim. If how much this is.
Much of ancient literature which revels in tales of death, surviving heroes, monsters, and a wide range of monstrous demons. The Hebrew Bible or the Christian Old Testament, the largest extant library of Israelite literature, is remarkably terse in this regard. While oblique references to supernatural creatures, sea monsters, wilderness spirits, or even the ever popular Nephilim are peppered throughout the book, with more reference to perhaps also the poorest understood Rephaim. This is, at least in confusing appearance of these beings in Israelite literature. At times, powerful warriors of monstrous size and appearance locked in combat with Israelite warriors, and at other times, they appear to be ancient heroes or kings in the most remote regions of Sheol, the Israelite afterlife. Even more odd still, their name, at least at first blush, appears.
Yeah, so the implication is that they're heroes of old that are called upon, like this is at least my reading of it. They're Rafad, sunk down into the earth because they've been buried a long time ago, but because of how, like, the fact that they are like this, goes back into antiquity, you can call upon their spirits in order to get healing or to commune with them. That's the context that I'm drawing from it. But again, the fact that those two roots share, those two meanings share the same root, it could just be a coincidence.
Well, there's a tradition series, the magic names, the magical list of names, where they'll just like list a whole bunch of gods for different contexts, whether it's magic, just straight up magic or sorcery. It's going to be like healing, or even diplomatic treaties. They'll list a whole bunch of gods, just random gods from different places. And it's kind of like almost like looking at it today. I can see that kind of vibe in parts of the pagan community where it's just self-indulgent, like, oh, I know about this god, I know about that god. And people in antiquity weren't really any different than that.
Wait, you're telling me that people today aren't different from people in the past because we're people?
Yeah, the people in the past were very, very human, and I guess I just try to relate to that. Is that they had the same kind of annoying, silly character flaws that people in our community have today.
Interesting.
And the other thing is talking about like deities who can be called upon, or monsters that can be called upon for healing. Obviously, in Ugaritic, we have the Kathirat, who are 7 goddesses who were called upon for healing, and also the dragon Sataqamet, who was invoked through magical rituals to bring healing, specifically for maladies brought on by the gods.
Interesting.
This is also related to Hurrian myth, because Hurrian myth was very, very influential on Greek myth and Semitic myth. They kind of introduced the concept of monsters into the story, and I don't know, people who are not particularly familiar with Hurrian myth, because most people aren't, one of the themes is what's his name? Kumarbi, the old, kind of patriarch of the Hurrian pantheon, can't keep it in his pants, and he has sex with random things like mountains or sea whales or whatever, and he'll give birth to some kind of
wait a second.
offspring.
What about couches?
Yeah, it would be totally on theme, actually, because there were all sorts of furniture gods in the ancient Near East.
You got the joke, though?
Kumarbi, the couch?
No, no, because it's not real. But there was this someone was spreading this thing about JD Vance saying that he had sexual relations with a couch, and he never denied it, but it became a joke because he didn't deny it, but it was like a fake quote that people were posting on. But no, it just kind of reminded me of that.
Well, the idea of spiritual sex and giving rise to spiritual children is a concept that actually has a very long history to it. And in fact, the Hurrians had this myth that, the origin of different monstrous creatures came from Kumarbi's inability to keep it in his pants, or I guess tunic.
Whoa. Okay, that's really eerie. You know what that's making me think of?
The Nephilim?
Huh?
Is it the Nephilim?
No. Have you ever seen do you know who Ari Shaffir is?
Ari Shaffir?
Yeah.
No.
Let's see, one second. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, here it is.
None of what you got is as crazy as this thing. This comes from Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. There's a book in there called the Zohar, which is the most out there mystical book there is. It's out there. And they tell you.
I started studying it.
It's about ghosts and the afterlife and shit like that. Most of Judaism is honestly just how to live your day-to-day life. Like how to love your wife. We do respect our wives. You just can't participate, but you got to respect your wife. How to love your wife, how to keep kosher, what happens if a goy hams up your soup, all that stuff. And the Zohar is why bother? And it drove men insane to study it. So they say you're not supposed to study it until you're 35 and married. But I saw it on a shelf in my yeshiva in Jerusalem. And I was, Jews are inquisitive. We're nosy on two fronts. I was like, nobody's looking. I'm like, fuck it, I'm cracking it. I opened it up. I thought ghosts were gonna fly out, Harry Potter books. It's just a book. So I read it, and I read one passage before they found me and stopped me, and it was it's about masturbation. I got lucky. So you know how you're not supposed to masturbate in every religion? There's not one religion.
There's a good reason why.
Why wouldn't you do it? Of course, masturbate. Look how long.
I knew you were going to get to this. I was actually going to get to this as well. They have the same thing in Islamic culture, by the way. To make a point, in medieval and early modern Judaism, and I suppose more traditionalist people will still do this, is if you have a wet dream, the assumption is you had a dibuk in a Jewish context or a jinn in a Muslim context.
Well, no, but
that seduced you in your sleep.
So in a Jewish context, not a dibuk, but Lilith.
Uh-huh. And they would have, they wouldn't mention the children of demons or whatever who would seduce the men in their sleep, essentially, in the will, saying, well, you don't get anything. As if they took it as a completely credible part of, life, that you would have your human children with your human wife, and then you would have all the children, spiritual children, produced by all your goopy night splooge.
That is a way of saying that for certain. I was going to say it's also there is a tradition that every time that Abraham and Sarah that they not consummate, but every time that they had relations but didn't produce a child, that it produced like souls in heaven, and those are the souls that are like that are in the people who convert to Judaism. So like the idea is that they've always had like that Jewish soul. It just doesn't enter their body until they finally like do the actual full process of converting, which again is its own political thing because different traditions have different standards. But I do think it's kind of interesting because in a sense there's this idea that because also like the 600,000 souls at Sinai or whatever, like there's this idea that they like were embodied in the Israelites at Sinai, but that previously that they weren't. And so in a sense, it's almost like the idea is that the souls of converts are more primordial, more ancient than those who are born Jewish.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that they must have had to do something retroactively to explain why converts tend to be so much more zealous than, born believers, I guess.
Interesting.
And for Judaism in particular, the legacy, the genealogical legacy of Israel, of Jacob and Abraham is so important in legitimizing your Jewishness, that they had to create some kind of like spiritual answer for why there could be Jewish converts.
Yeah. But yeah, so this is what I was
I made your arm. Go for it. It feels awesome. Why wouldn't you do it? Of course, masturbate. Look how long I made your arm. I could have gone with any design. I went from scratch. I went exactly thumb on top on both hands. Come on. No, don't touch it. Every religion's like, don't touch it. So in the Zohar, it says, when you're masturbating, you do masturbate. What happens is, unbeknownst to you, a demon woman comes into the room. Yeah, I know. And she rides you. She fucks you. You can't see her or feel her. So calm down, incels. And she rides you. And then when you come, it goes into her. And she gets pregnant. Yeah, this is all real shit, dude. Well, whatever. I mean, none of this is real shit, but it's as real as Adam and Eve. And she rides you and she gets pregnant and she goes off to this nether region. Like it's not heaven or hell or earth. It's just like this in between. It's kind of like Stranger Things, the upside down. And she goes and has her baby. And the next time you masturbate, she comes back and she rides you again. Might be a month later, probably like 20 minutes later. And every single time you masturbate, the same demon lady rides you. And every single time she gets pregnant. She might be Latina.
Oh my God.
It's tough to say. They didn't really have that in the Old Testament, but signs point to that's what they were saying. And all through your teens, you're just whipping out these demon kids. Just kids. Through your 20s, kids. These demon kids you have. Oh, and it describes the kids. And they are fucked up. Yeah, not only because they grew up in a single-parent household. Yeah, that can mess with any child. It's worse than that. They're mutants. Describes them. They're half demon, half human. So they're all like deformed. They got like one short leg, one short arm, like 18 eyeballs going on their side. Oh, and they hate you. Yeah, because I guess somebody told them if you just waited and fucked a regular human, they could have been a regular boy or girl. You couldn't wait, could you, degenerate piece of shit? You saw an inside-out sock on the floor, and you're like, I'm gonna make a little demon baby right now. Yeah, by the way, none of this applies to women. You guys can jill off all you want, scot-free. Yeah, enjoy your first taste of female privilege. But for the men, when we're producing these fucking demon babies going, I hate daddy. Somebody was like, what are you talking about, daddy? Like, yeah, I hate daddy. I hate him too. Blink, 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 blink. And then 2 more pop up because you couldn't sleep on a Monday. What is this? Daddy did it. I hate him. All through your 30s, kids, 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 kids. Your whole life just whipping out these demon babies till you're 90-something years old, and you're like, I think I'll masturbate one more time. I haven't masturbated in 15 years. My Parkinson's will help me with this. And then you get one drop, doesn't matter, kid. And then you die. Everybody dies, right? At some point you die. You wake up. It's the afterlife. And then you're like, is that the afterlife? I knew it. I knew it was an afterlife. Is that heaven? Can I get in? They're like, well, this is what they tell you. Like, you can come in. Before you do, you have to go meet your kids. Yeah, they make you meet him. And you don't have any kids. And they'll be like, you have so many kids. Oh, my God. Oh, it's my favorite part of the job. Dude, it says here in college you made 11 per week for 4.5 years. So they point you to this house, the demon lady's house. You go over there, you knock on the door, the demon lady opens the door, and you're like, hello? And she goes, oh, hello, mister. Oh, Mr. Ari, you have to meet your kids? Yeah, I guess so. She opens the door, and there's an army of them. You have no idea how many times you masturbated. It's so many. And they're all just walking around like Walking Dead, They don't say anything. And then one of them finally is like, Daddy? And they all look like, Daddy's here! And they all start coming at you like, why, Daddy? Why can't I be a real little boy, Daddy? I want to live, Daddy! We want to live, Daddy! Yeah, it's a fucking horror movie. Very unsettling. Here's the cool part. That is negative. Here's the cool part. You don't have to take care of them. Yeah, you still got to go to heaven. It just for real ruins the vibe that first week. You meet your loved ones, your grandparents, like, Ari, I need a minute, guys. Whoa.
Oh my God, that is so funny.
It is really spot on though, and it's not just a Jewish thing. Actually, my wife comes from a Muslim context, and in a Jewish context, they make light of this, because it's just what people believed in the olden days, But in a modern day Muslim context, especially in Morocco, these kind of things are taken deadly seriously. Even people who weren't particularly religious, they'll have these little superstitions like you can't pour boiling water down the drain. You might make the jinns that live in it angry.
Interesting.
And I think the concept of a spiritual creature, well, in the Christian context, a demon essentially just means a negative spiritual creature. But in a Muslim or a Jewish context, what they would call a demon, or what Muslims would call a jinn, is neither an explicitly negative or positive spiritual creature, but a parallel spiritual creature in a different realm of existence, or a parallel realm of existence. That's why, for example, in Islam, they have the idea of Muslim jinns who are believers and perhaps even jinn prophets.
Yeah, similar in Judaism, the idea of Jewish demons and non-Jewish demons as well.
So, for example, there's an idea of 𝐤𝐿𝐼, who some have conflated with Baal, actually.
Wait,
because of his role in fertility in the Islamic religion. But he's described as this immortal being who with green skin, who brings fertility wherever he goes, and he just doesn't die. He just goes anywhere, everywhere, and he's reported of coming up in many different places for different Muslim holy men in many different corners of the world, even after Quranic times. He's a very he's not super well known, except among like these sort of esoteric people.
Yeah, like especially amongst like Taoists, right?
He's very popular among Sufis specifically, which obviously is Islamic mysticism, as opposed much the same way you talk about the Shekinah in Jewish mysticism. Well,
Interesting.
the idea of like a parallel realm with parallel beings, almost like a urban fantasy. This may have been the original conception of gods, actually, as being a spiritual world that exists parallel to our own world. That perhaps the gods don't actually exist 100% in our world, but rather in this parallel world, and they interact with it maybe to a certain extent, depending on perspective. Well, at least that's one perspective I've heard entertained.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Means something like the healers or the healed ones. All this combined creates an incredibly confusing portrait of beings mentioned around 30 times over 10 different Israelite texts, more than any such comparable beings. Who were the mysterious Rephaim? In this episode, we'll dive deep into the Bronze Age writings found at Ugaritic, the tomb inscriptions of the Phoenicians, and of course, the puzzling narratives of the Hebrew Bible to better understand these mysterious beings. If you're interested in ancient magic, occult practices, or alchemy, Kabbalah, or Gnosticism, make sure to subscribe. Check out my other content on topics in esotericism as well, including curated playlists. Also, if you want to support my work of providing accessible, scholarly, and free content like this on topics in esotericism here on YouTube for free, I'd hope you consider supporting my work on Patreon or with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and your support of this channel is the only thing that makes it possible. I really do appreciate your consideration for supporting the channel. But now, let's turn to the mysterious Rephaim. Ancient giants, kings of the dead, monstrous heroes, or something else entirely. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
I love his intro.
Let's make sure we give commentary if we're gonna
we will
engage with a video.
For sure.
I think just watching it, that's just plagiarism. But if we engage with his like different arguments, positive,
the nature of the Rephaim has puzzled scholars and readers of the Bible for millennia. Even the ancient translators of the Bible to Greek and Aramaic from the original Hebrew weren't even really sure how to.
It's also interesting, even though it is so like this is with an aleph, but if you were to replace replace the aleph with an ayin and reverse the order, you'd get a far, which is connected to the earth, to the dust.
To the earth, let our strong one fall. To the dirt, our mighty one.
Interesting. And like even the idea of like, was it dust to dust, ash to ash? The dust that's used how far? Yeah, I heard that.
To render the term, by then it was already mysterious to those ancient scholars. Sometimes they rendered it as giants, titans, healers, and in other cases they just transliterated it rather than actually trying to make any translation.
That makes sense.
Over the centuries, more than a dozen distinct concepts of these beings has emerged.
A dozen.
From the shades of the dead to powerful ancient heroes, giants, even a specific ethnic group, ancestor spirits, and even to supernatural
ancestor spirits
and more. Of course, the origin of the difficulty lies in, 1, the puzzling variety of the forms that these beings seem to take in the Hebrew Bible, and 2, their very name. Like many Semitic words, Rephaim is
Has
the
many
masculine
meanings.
plural from the triliteral root Resh Pe Aleph, which by the later Iron Age does mean something like to heal in the medical sense, though the earlier meaning of the root seemed to mean something closer to mend or to stitch together, to repair. In fact, it still has that meaning in Arabic, Hebrew, and Ethiopian. If we were to travel back in time to wind back the clock to the Bronze Age, the word had an even more broad meaning something more like to make whole, to render intact, thus metaphorically to mean something like to be perfected, or perhaps best of all, to be flawless, both in a moral and a value sense, rather than in a medical sense.
Interesting. What do you take from that?
I think it's a good parallel or a good opposite to Anatu, who's the cleaver or the separator. I kind of like get Frankenstein vibes because I don't know if you've heard about these stories, but there were incidents in the cosmography of Sekuniathon where Shamuma, the father of El and the ancestor of the gods, was trying to kill El and his children, basically makes like a golem or a constructed life, let's say. Something that's pieced together, I would imagine. That's kind of what the sense I'm getting from that. Almost, parallel to Kumarbi, the ancestor of the gods in the Hurrian pantheon, who, whether through sexual miscreancy or some sort of Frankenstein bullshit, ends up creating a whole bunch of monsters that his proper son Teshub has to battle with, paralleling the later Greek gigantomachy and titanomachy, which were seen as being distinct, battles. The first battle, the titanomachy, is between two different generations of gods, and the gigantomachy is like the sequel to that. It's these other children of the Titans that are trying to get revenge, the ones that are less obviously human. And this comes from Hurrian myth by way of the Hittites and the Luwians to the Greeks. It's in one of the oldest literate stratum of Greek mythology from Hesiod.
Indeed. Kumarbi bites off the testicles of Anu. LOL.
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with like severing gonads or genitalia, and then the seed will like pour out and create some kind of being or the other. That's kind of how they understood, sperm. If you just drop your sperm anywhere, it's going to create some kind of creature. And a god has a very powerful sperm. That's why that's why onanism is a really big sin, or is emphasized as being a big sin in the Bible, because you don't want to give Mother Earth your cum shot. She might create some kind of weird demon baby. We're dirt or poop baby.
Ew.
That's my explanation for an otherwise really weird and puzzling part of the Bible.
Yeah.
Thus,
but one of the most important.
Before the puzzling nature of Rephaim found.
Well, there is another explanation for that.
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with the idea of like of Yibum, like of that literally that seed is owed to the woman.
Well, I think that's the default, or rather the literal, practical reason. But there's also, I think, a spiritual and metaphysical reason.
Oh, you're saying like that's why it says don't spill it onto the ground rather than don't waste it?
Yeah, it's not just don't waste it. You create something by spilling your seed on the ground.
Interesting.
Spilling it on the ground. If he gave his wife a good splat, maybe not inside her, but maybe on her belly or her backside,
Right.
it wouldn't be on the ground. It wouldn't be making like weird poop babies.
Interesting.
Hebrew Bible, we have to look much, much further back in time to the myth history of the Bronze Age world of Canaanite Ugaritic. First excavated in the 1930s, the site of Ras Shamra Ugaritic is our best glimpse into the world of Bronze Age Canaanite culture, especially the literature of
What
that
does
religion.
Ras Shamra mean? I know Ras is head. Shamra.
It
What's
means
that?
fennel.
What?
It means fennel.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting. Very early cuneiform alphabet, many religious and mythological texts survived the Bronze Age collapse on clay tablets.
Where they were baked.
Pretty vast literature provides us with an amazing glimpse into the religious literature of Canaan centuries before Israelite hegemony in the regions to the south. It is here in the myth cycles, the liturgical literature, and other fragments that the Rephaim first appear in history. Though, even by this early stage, their nature and identity seem to have been long since standardized. Even by the 14th century BCE, the Rephaim are already known to the writers. While never the star of the show, the Rephaim do pepper a range of texts, including central narratives like the Baal cycle, the legend of Akkad, and the tale of King 𤐤𝐴, where they generally appear with a very similar group of traits.
King 𐤤𝐴. Doesn't that would be like Melk 𐤤𝐴? Doesn't that literally? Wouldn't King 𤤤𝐴 essentially just be Melkart?
I'm wondering if his myth got transcribed into the myth of Melkart, but there was a historical King 𤐤𝐴 behind the myth, who was one of the founders of the Mitanni kingdom.
Interesting.
𤐤𝐴. The myth he's mentioned as coming from a land that I think is vaguely alluded to be something like the Manda land. I'm not sure.
This is
going around to different cities, essentially extracting tribute and trying to interact with the local gods. Basically, set down roots that he doesn't already have in his new territory.
That totally fits Melkart, because he's the god of of colonization, of spreading out, of trade.
One of the issues I think could be explained just by the evolution and renationalization of different myths. Is Melkart is very, very closely tied with the city of Tyre, whereas 𐤤𝐴 is more like, is an Aryan figure from the Eurasian steppe.
What's the issue with that? It could have been adopted into the Semitic tradition as Melkart, taken from. Because think about it, if you say 𐤤𝐴 in because it's also, what was it, Karet in Ugaritic, or 𝐤𝐴, but you take 𐤤𝐴, you take the Semitic word for king, put it in front of it, Mulk 𐤤𝐴, Melkart, easily could have been rendered into Semitic that way.
Could be.
It's also interesting because what is this? He also interacts with Horono, the master of demons, which is interesting because Horon is. It almost seems like the difference between Mot and Horon. Mot is the god of death, and Horon is like the god of like the spirits of the dead.
It's like Mot is kind of bodies like the transitional aspects of death itself, and Horon is a chthonic deity that rules over the underworld, but also is a healing deity who would be called upon, for healing and such like.
Yeah, and then there you also get that kind of that connection back to the sunken, the buried, but also the healing.
Like with the Rapiuma.
Yeah.
Oh, I should mention that many of these texts were actually written down by the same scribe, Ilimiku, whose signature on those tablets has given him a taste of immortality. He might be one of the Rephaim now. In these texts, dated to the 14th century BCE, the Rephaim seem to be a small set,
That's
perhaps less
clever.
than 10, of semi-divine heroic warriors, seemingly the offspring of the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon, the elder god El. Here they're associated with riding in chariots, feasting at divine banquets such as the famous and mysterious Marzeaḥ, where
Ooh.
so drunk that he
Interesting. That's a really nice connection.
At divine banquets such as the famous and mysterious Marzeaḥ, where
let's see, where is this? Thukamuna and Shunama, the creeper, the one having two horns and a tail. So it's almost like they're the ones who bring him down. Maybe they're almost like, oh, this is interesting. What is that term? Oh my God, I'm blanking. One moment. What is it called when someone who is about to die sees their loved ones? There's what is the term for this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that concept.
Maybe it's almost like this idea of like the spirits of the dead that they come to bring you down.
Well, I mean, they can bring you down or bring you to the other side or something.
Yeah.
The guide to the other. Yeah.
Well, but think about that. That we only have this idea of the other side, as opposed to like the underworld, because of the acknowledgement that that like our consciousness and bodies aren't one and the same, not strictly. And so that means that even after you're buried, the consciousness that was you is like somewhere else, as opposed to in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
The idea of underworld comes
I can't hear you.
But I wonder how much the concept of the underworld comes from were buried alive in antiquity.
Ooh. Honestly, I do kind of wonder how, because I think a big part of it might also be underground cities, like you have in, was it Drunkenness?
Yeah, so, they have different underground cities in, I think, 𝐤𐤓𝐤𝐿 and Anatolia. I wouldn't be surprised more than that. I'm not an expert in that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here.
El's actually said to have gotten so drunk that he crapped himself and then he fell into it. The text actually ends with the world's first hangover cure, or at least one of the earliest hangover cures that we have. So there's that. Putting that over there, the Rephaim are also said to have had a kind of brotherly kinship, with a few being kings and righteous judges, such as the famed Daniel, who's actually going to reappear in the Hebrew Bible book of Ezekiel. That they are divine progeny, though, capable of dying, gives them the right to rule and judge, with this theophoric Resh Pei Aleph being popular among Ugaritic names. The text even indicates where they are said to have emerged, somewhere in the Bethlehem region in what is now Lebanon and southern Syria.
I wonder, does that imply that Raphael is a Rephaim?
I know. You need to argue like a lawyer.
What?
Argue like a lawyer. Oh, shit.
Did you just spill a little, I don't know what that was.
I was just doing the dishes and I got some water on the floor.
No demon babies from that, at least.
The problem with doing a party is you have to do all the washing up.
true.
In fact, Psalm 65 in the Hebrew Bible seems to record a very ancient memory where El, again the main god of the Canaanite pantheon, first dwelled on a mountain in Bashan before being transferred for political and cultic reasons to Mount. First
Wait,
dwelled
what?
a very ancient memory where El, again the main god of the Canaanite pantheon, first record a very ancient
Psalm 65. Let's check this out. Texts 65. Let's see. Where? Okay, something about Bashan. Did I miss this? This is saying that it's like connected to yeah, I don't know how this is connecting to Bashan at all. This doesn't, I don't see it. I don't know how he's connecting that. I'm probably missing. Wait. Oh, wait. Psalm 60.
Syria. In fact, Psalm 65 in the Hebrew Bible seems to record a very ancient memory where El, again the main god of the Canaanite pantheon, first dwelled on a mountain in Bashan before being transferred for political and cultic reasons to Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Indeed, this notion seems to be a reference to the period prior to the time before the fusion of Yahweh and El into a single deity. In a handful of Ugaritic liturgical texts, including a memorial for a deceased king and a coronation of a new king, we learned that previous, now deceased kings actually stand up from their otherworldly thrones to greet now dead kings into the afterlife.
Interesting.
Thus, it appears that while not all Rephaim were kings, kings may live as the descendants of the original Rephaim and then also go on to dwell with the deceased Rephaim in the afterlife.
I'm not completely
be a Rephaim both here and in the afterlife. And this probably explains the ultimate origin of the term itself, something like flawless or perfected. In fact, the medical use of the root, Resh Aleph, in the Ugaritic time for medical reasons is actually quite rare. Thus, already in the 14th century,
so how did it?
BCE,
I don't know how the transition would have happened.
Stable. They were a cadre of heroic, semi-divine offspring of El, their kingly descendants in the Canaanite.
Oh, I wonder if this is where the idea of the B'nai Elohim comes from, like the. You see what I'm saying? Not the idea of B'nai El, because that's something different. But the idea of B'nai Elohim, like that you see in the Bible, like in the beginning of Genesis. Because one of the traditions that that the rabbinic tradition has is that they were essentially these human kings and heroes who had a lot of power and renown. And that fits perfectly with this, from what we know of what the Rapiuma were in one context at least. So, yeah, because what's interesting is, according to this, Rephaim originally had a context more like Elohim, because Elohim comes from the root El, which has to do with power and strength, whereas Rapha had to do with flawless. So, like, you could easily see how the two could have a similar connotation of divinity.
Yeah, well, there's lots of cases where there are multiple parallel categories of, like, for example, in Indo-Aryan religion, there's the Devas and the Asuras, who are, in one religious tradition, the Devas are evil and the Asuras are good, which I think is the standard in Zoroastrianism. And the other, the Devas are good and the Asuras are evil.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because Deva comes from the same root as Deus, meaning like divinity or deity. And then Asura comes from the same root as Aesir.
It is. That's exactly it. And of course, in the Nordic mythologies, there were different, the Aesir and the Vanir.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It's not surprising that there may be different lineages of God even in the Semitic pantheons.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because you have the Aesir and the Vanir, but in Deva you have Va, so maybe it's like the Deva, and then the De gets dropped because you have was it? Yeah. If you have the maybe just assume that the day gets dropped. You have va, and then that could have like, I don't know. I'm not great with Indo-European languages, but maybe the near got added on, and so that you have the asir and the vanir. Because yeah, asura, you don't actually have the ear, so it's possible that the ear got added to both. So it was like you have the asar ear or like asir, and then the deva, and then that just gets vanir. I don't know. Super speculative.
We shouldn't assume it's separate after all, because the Iranian tradition existed in the Near East, and of course, the Mitanni, they were essentially just, they have the same deities as the Vedic pantheon, but here instead of India.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like you literally have, was it Jupiter and Diospiter or Diospiter?
The idea is like there's really just only one religion and many different interpretations of it.
Yeah.
Dwelled in the Ugaritic afterlife. Phoenician references to the Rephaim, while much fewer, do add just a little to the older Ugaritic conception. Indeed, the appearance of Rephaim, the Rephaim theophoric element in Phoenician names, is significantly smaller in the Phoenician context, which indicates that the Rephaim were not a substantial aspect of Phoenician cultic life. Though a pair of Phoenician sarcophagi, we are actually warned that anyone who disturbed the bodies within those sarcophagi will not be welcomed by the Rephaim in death. This warning appears to be targeted at fellow kings and other aristocrats who might desecrate the remains of the former king in a bid to establish their own legitimacy. Thus, again, we have the conception of the Rephaim as a special aristocratic cadre of deceased kings. In fact, it seems that by the Roman period, the Rephaim had actually been assimilated into the Manes, at least for North African Phoenicians, those living over there near Carthage. For those that know of the Rephaim primarily from the Hebrew Bible, the most notable elements of the Rephaim in those texts are, well, they're largely missing in this earlier stratus of text. While they can die and endure into the afterlife, most of the Rephaim are very much alive in these
that context, Emek Rephaim, the Valley of the Rephaim, could also be like the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, like a place where very powerful and influential people were buried, and it's like people visit there in order to be in the presence of them.
Well, I mean, like all those pyramids and mortuary temples had priesthoods that carried on for thousands of years after these kings died. Their cult was objectively divine, and the idea of a strong dividing line between Canaanite and Egyptian gets very, very blurry the further back you get. Like in the pre-dynastic period, there really wasn't a clear cultural line between Lower Egypt and Canaan even then, to a certain extent. The idea as separate from a Canaanite had to be invented.
It's almost like you could think of the Southwest US and how it kind of like you could say it's American, you could say it's Mexican, and you wouldn't be wrong in either case.
Probably by the late Bronze Age, there were more Canaanites living in the Egyptian Nile Delta than there were in Canaan.
Interesting. That's honestly similar to Jewish history. Basically, for most of Jewish history, there's been more Jews living, in diaspora than outside, or than in the land, than in like Canaan.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was the norm, Even when there was a Jewish state in the Levant in antiquity, still the majority of Judahites, Jewish people, lived in Egypt at that time. Even as far as like Nubia, you see large communities. And when you see even like a well-preserved temple, that's not representative of just, there's one temple. Yeah, there's one temple you have proof of, but there was very likely many Jewish and Canaanitish temples throughout Egypt of various varieties.
Mhm.
throughout the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Well, definitely the Iron Age.
Further, while they are heroic in nature, there's no reference to their being giants or otherwise monstrous. In fact, the opposite is true in these earliest texts. The Rephaim are praiseworthy, wise, and kingly, and they welcome people into death. And this welcoming at least kings into the afterlife is among the very best afterlives one can achieve. Join the Rephaim in death. Virtually the opposite in every respect, the depiction of the Rephaim in the Hebrew Bible, where they are monstrous giants, the constant enemies of Israel, and their doom in the afterlife is worthy of derision and mockery. Now, to understand this shift of the Rephaim in Israelite mythology, let's explore how they appear in the surviving library of Israelite literature, the Hebrew Bible, also the Christian Old Testament. The Rephaim are mentioned about 30 times across 10 books of the Hebrew Bible, thus making them
Interesting.
among the most attested supernatural beings, for want of a better word, in that text, next to members of the divine council, especially messenger beings such as angels.
Alicia? Oh,
In fact, in many ways, the Rephaim come second to the angels in terms of references. Generally speaking, the Rephaim of the Hebrew Bible can be split into two distinct groups, living and dead Rephaim. Of the living Rephaim, a further
interesting.
subdivision is possible. Those that live over in the Transjordan, apparently the traditional home of the Rephaim, and those that live west of the Transjordan, especially their connections with the Philistines. The Rephaim of the Transjordan appear during the Abraham narratives in Genesis, where the kings of the east defeat them in battle, only to reappear at the end of the Israelite journey to Canaan, where we
Huh?
learn that, in fact, they are
They're
giants,
dead?
the first
Wait, what?
reference really to their gigantic stature in the literature. This is curious because in the earlier battle starring Abraham, which is probably the point of that story, to make Abraham out to be a kind of heroic warrior, the alliance of the Eastern Kings seems to pretty easily defeat them, and there's no mention made at that point of their stature, gigantic or otherwise. Of course,
So it's probably referring to almost like a dynasty. You see what I'm saying? Because that would also explain why they were like, if basically you have like this separate group of people who they have this tradition that they get like a better afterlife than everybody else, and that could also be why that narrative later got reversed and it was they're actually the worst ones, because you see what I'm saying? Kind of like a similar idea that a rich man can't get into it's easier for a rich man to get, or easier for a poor man. I mean, easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. I would not be surprised if these are connected to this tradition, but like basically where it started off with, the wealthier you are, the like basically your existence in the current world was seen as connected to like fate in a way that I think later on it got seen more as a test. And so the whole idea was that if you were this rich, this very arrogant, haughty person. But see, that's the thing. Originally, and it's the same idea, even the whole idea of nobility. Nobility, people don't tend to associate the word noble with nobility because of the way that it kind of got flipped. You see what I mean?
Mhm. Well, the idea seems very strange to us now, but in the day, nobility really meant something that people thought was foundational to their culture. They really believed that there was this class of people who were above everywhere else.
It's scary realizing that rich people don't know what to do with their money, and that older people don't necessarily know more than you just because they're older. But
of course, there are other giants mentioned across the Jordan. Famously, there are those that are said to make the Israelites look like grasshoppers in comparison, but they are not linked, at least here, with the Rephaim. In fact, this is all probably part of an elaborate rhetorical device to make all of Israelites' enemies appear to be gigantic or otherwise monstrous, to amplify the value of the eventual Israelite victory in the narrative. Lastly, we're also told of a specific member of the Rephaim that the forces of Moses encountered and defeated, the king Og of Bashan. While in the earlier narrative found in Numbers, Og is simply defeated along with his sons,
And Bashan used to be associated
the
with
later text in
El.
Deuteronomy makes him to be the last of the Rephaim, who stood about 14 feet tall or so, and whose famous bed or eres, which I actually think is probably a sarcophagus, could, at least according to the text, still be seen in the region of the Ammonites. Again, the point of this narrative, like the Abraham narrative, is to make Moses appear as a kind of heroic general, defeating the last of the Rephaim in their own homeland. Remember, Og is king of Bashan, Bashan being the ancient Rephaite homeland. In fact, the text is at pains to point out the dimensions of the Rephaim's homeland in detail, focusing on the Transjordan cities of Ashtaroth and Idrei, sites also directly connected with the Canaanite god El in much older ancient Ugaritic texts. This shows Israelite familiarity with the traditional Rephaim tales, something that we see in the Israelite prophets in a moment, but that doesn't explain their subversion of just that narrative. While the more ancient narratives revel in the heroic victories of the Rephaim, the Israelite narrative hails their defeat and annihilation. We'll get to why in just a moment. Like the Western Rephaim of the Transjordan, the Eastern Rephaim are also primarily depicted as gigantic or otherwise monstrous enemies of the Israelites, here specifically associated with the Philistines. We learn that some of the elite Philistine warriors were the descendants of Harapha, especially Sipai, Lachmi, the man of Madon or Midi, depending on which text you're reading.
Wait, what?
And, of course, the Philistine warriors were the descendants of Harapha, especially Sipai, Lachmi, the man of Madon or Midi, depending on which text you're reading. And, of course, Goliath, the Gittite, whose spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, which needs to be the title of a romance novel right now. These gigantic or otherwise monstrous Philistines.
Oh, that was hilarious.
Remember the otherwise unnamed man of Madon is said to have had.
I wish I had just some humor.
Right now, shaft was like a weaver's beam,
What?
which needs to be.
I need to have some humor.
Whose spear shaft was like a weaver's beam, which needs to be the title of a romance novel right now. These gigantic or otherwise monstrous Philistine descendants of the Rephaim, remember the otherwise unnamed man of Madon is said to have had 12 fingers and 12 toes, for instance, are again introduced into the narrative just to be defeated by the Israelites. Specifically here, the narrative is especially tortured because it appears that a guy named Elchanan is actually the first attested to kill Goliath, with the text eventually, let's call it, edited to give the youth David credit, which is probably part of a Davidic or later Judean kingly propaganda campaign, or even told of a valley of the Rephaim raided by the Philistines just to the southwest of Jerusalem. In all these narratives, like those that take place in the Transjordan, the Rephaim, or the Philistines linked with the Rephaim because of their stature and heroic prowess as warriors, are introduced into the narrative just to be killed by the Israelites in order to establish the heroic character of Israelite Rephaim heroes, Abraham, Moses, and David, respectively. Thus, while the Rephaim as heroic warriors is retained, the Israelite writers seek to out-Rephaim.
They're saying they defeated them.
Retained, the Israelite writers seek to out-Rephaim them as heroes through the military defeat by specifically Israelite heroes. But note that
what's interesting, there is a context in which I would argue there are actually Jewish Rephaim. Do you know where I'm going with this? Colette?
Yes.
Do you hear what I'm saying? What I said?
There's a context. There's Jewish Rephaim.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, including all the people you just mentioned, Abraham, Moses, and David. And basically, so there's this tradition. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called the Ushpizin.
Yeah. No, I haven't heard of this. Maybe not in that terms.
Sorry, what?
Not in those terms. No. What is it?
So I'm trying to find something that kind of explains it better. Okay, here. Let's see, videos. Oh, here.
If I told you I'm inviting dead people into my home, you'd probably think I'm kind of weird, right? Well, on Sukkot, we have a custom called Ushpizin, which means guests, dating from the ancient book of mystical wisdom, the Zohar. Each night, we invite a biblical figure to bring blessings into our home. What does that even mean? they come back to life and walk through the door, the domestic Eliezer of Komarne explains that what actually happens is they bring a part of themselves through us. You see, with each holy guest, we reveal an aspect of them in ourselves and those around us. The kindness of Abraham, the courage of Isaac, the splendor of Jacob come to life within us. Join me for the next 7 days as we look at each ushpiz or holy guest one at a time, and we see how they come to life through us and we come to life through them.
Kindness of Abram the pimp.
What?
Now let us say the pimp's prayer. Lord, may God bless my hand as I smack some sense into this surly hole. Amen.
But yeah, and so the first day is Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, then I think Moses, then Aaron, then Joseph, and then David. So it's kind of interesting, this idea that you're welcoming them in. Like, it's not just like, oh, you're trying to embody that. It's literally this idea that they're spirits you're welcoming in to your feast.
Well, it's very similar to the story of the Witch of Endor, where
I was thinking that as well.
they're conferring with the spirit of Samuel. But this is considered a very sinful thing that Saul did.
Interesting. But yeah, so I think that in a certain sense, Rephaim, it's kind of in the eye of the beholder.
That's somewhat what an angel is. People have a stereotype what an angel is. But if you ask a theologian what an angel is, you're going to find a lot of disagreements, especially if they're trying to be very precise.
And especially if they're a Jewish theologian.
Fucking Jewish theologian.
No, you get the joke because you ask a Jew, you ask, 4 Jews, you'll get 7 opinions.
Yep. Frankly, I can give 7 opinions myself.
Same.
Kind of malevolent giants. How did this come to pass exactly? Well, to tell
David
the truth,
wins.
the exact
Fatality.
mechanism is obscure, but it's probably linked with the shift in Israelite mythology from the poly and henotheism of its earlier period to something much more like the monotheism as the texts of the Hebrew Bible are finally redacted as we have them probably pretty late in their composition cycle, maybe even into the Greek and Persian periods. There seems to have been a shift where all semi-divine beings, including members of the divine council, such as the famous Satan, any divine consorts, like Asherah perhaps, the sons of God, and likely the Rephaim, were either demoted or worse, demonized as the full logic of monotheism was rigorously implemented. In this case specifically, the sons of God, probably literal sons of God at some level in the text, were quasi-divine beings who descended from the divine heavens to earth to mate with human women associated somehow with the famous Nephilim, or the ones that descended, or the fallen ones. This illicit mating, it seems, produced what the text called 𝐤𐤓𐤆 me'olam anshe Hashem,
Wait a
the
second.
heroes of olden times.
So it's interesting. So nafal means to fall, but rafa means to sink. So maybe it's almost like the Nephilim. Yeah, the Nephilim. Wait, no, is it saying the Nephilim gave way to the Anshe Hashem? This is so confusing.
Text called 𝐤𤐤𝐵orim me'olam ones.
Oh, the
This
Giborim.
illicit
So
mating
Rephaim are the
produced what the text
Giborim?
called 𝐤𤐤𝐵orim me'olam anshe Hashem, the heroes of olden times, the men of renown. Very likely a reference to the traditional concept of the Rephaim. In later myths, especially in Joshua, the descendants of these weird beings have somehow survived the flood, by the way, and now live as giants in Canaan as spotted by the Israelite spies. Also, there are some really great midrashim, or rabbinical legends, about how Og, king of Bashan, survived the flood by kind of hanging onto the ark and even kind of surfing on top of it. Needs to be a kid's cartoon. What seems to have happened here is that these two narratives became fused in time with the gianthood eventually also being transferred to the Rephaim, despite that not being a traditional attribute, especially as the role of the Rephaim was inverted in the narrative. No longer were they heroes to be praised, but heroes to be defeated, thus making their defeat as giants all the more stunning. I mean, it's one thing to defeat Rephaim, but it's another thing to defeat giant Rephaim. You can make them Rephair. Thus, it appears that in the general demotion
don't
of
get it.
divine elements of
I don't
earlier
get it at
Israelite
all.
mythology, the Nephilim and the
I was
Rephaim
thinking
undergo some kind of narrative cross-contamination in
the giants is just representing the fact that there were a bunch of fossils that ancient people would have found. There was a story from classical antiquity, and I say this because I think classical antiquity is more in the realm of like historical, clarity. It's not super mythical.
Yeah.
But the story goes that Sertorius, when he was in Mauritania, modern day Morocco, he discovered the remains of what was assumed to be the demigod Antaeus, a giant statue. But most modern historians assume this to be the remains of prehistoric life, perhaps a mammoth or some sort of dinosaur or whatnot.
Wow. It's interesting. It makes sense because this whole idea that like they're sunken in, they have to be dug up.
I have no idea. Well, actually, that's how fossilization occurs. The bones get covered by sediment, as far as I understand, and slowly they are replaced with sediment of a different type of sediment, actually, than the initial organic material that the bones are made out of.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating that stuff like that happens. Like fossilization is a kind of miracle, a real world miracle.
Yeah, that is really something that's quite. Well, maybe it's more simple to understand if you're more of an expert. I'm not a chemist.
Yeah, but the implications for humanity are huge. Imagine if we didn't have fossils to rely on.
Would be a very, very different world as far as our understanding of it goes.
interest of enhancing the Israelite military narrative, especially for Abraham, Moses, and of course our young boy David. So that's for the living Rephaim of the Hebrew Bible. What about the Rephaim in the realm of the dead? Like the living Rephaim, the Rephaim of the dead also function as witnesses to the power of Yahweh, especially over haughty non-Israelite earthly kings in the realm of the dead more generally. Again, it's clear that the writers of the Hebrew Bible were aware of the traditional Rephaim narrative. Recall that kings in the Ugaritic literature would be welcomed by the Rephaim in the realm of the dead, and they were highly praised, and this was a much desired afterlife in both Ugaritic and Phoenician myths. Remember that Phoenician sarcophagus warns that if you disturb it, you won't be welcomed by the Rephaim. But the Israelite writers actively sought to subvert this idea as part of their own theological agenda, that is, the unique divine supremacy of Yahweh. In the Israelite text, we find that the Rephaim in the Israelite afterlife, Sheol, but rather than them being the subject of praise, we're told that they dwell in the furthest reaches of the maggot-infested darkness, unremembered by Yahweh as a kind of punishment for their haughty pride during their lives. Here, the Rephaim are associated with non-Israelite kings who sought to ascribe to themselves divine status, only to be brought down to the depths of Sheol, most famously in the prophecy against Nebuchadnezzar at Isaiah 9. Of course, that passage where Halel ben Shachar, the morning star son of the dawn, seeks to become divine and is ultimately transformed into the fall of Satan, or Lucifer, in Christian mythology. In the Israelite worldview, such arrogant kings will never be forgiven or resurrected by Yahweh, thus forever proving that they are the very opposite of divine beings, dwelling forever among the worms of the grave.
So they're literally permanently sunk, permanently rafa. It's fascinating.
Interestingly here, they are never mentioned as giants.
Oh, you know, that's just like the Jewish idea of like there's certain things that if you don't believe in it, you're like you won't merit the Techiyah HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead. So it's almost like this idea that you become one of the Rephaim if you don't believe certain things, that your bones, your body will stay dead.
Well, that'd be nice. Better than reincarnation. I'll be reincarnated as a chicken monster.
Why not a large growth mushroom forest?
No, I don't even have like possible.
What do you mean?
Huh?
What language is that?
I'm just tired.
Valid. Here, we're almost done.
Living Rephaim mentioned earlier are specifically mentioned by name in this pretty extreme, terrible afterlife, which is unusual given the normal ideas around Sheol in Israelite literature, showing that this aspect of the Rephaim, though inverted, is more similar to the traditional concept from ancient Canaan. Though it does appear that Ezekiel does allow one traditional member of the Rephaim to go on to fame, Daniel, the judge famous for his compassion on lower social classes and the father of Akkad, not to be confused with the Daniel of the eponymous book of the Hebrew Bible, though there probably are some literary links there. Specifically, Ezekiel mentions Daniel along with Noah and Job as especially righteous people whose righteousness would nevertheless only save themselves and not their children. This establishes, by the way, at least in Jewish theology, that children cannot accrue either the righteousness nor the sins of their parents, with these verses often wielded against the Christian concept of original or inherited sin. Though not mentioned as a member of the Rephaim specifically in Ezekiel, this may be one of the only mentions of such beings in a positive light, in a positive way of thinking about the Rephaim in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible. From this extremely complicated narrative and linguistic interplay, it's much clearer now as to how the concept of the Rephaim became so confused in the centuries and millennia following the composition of the Hebrew Bible. And this is especially true as the memory of the earliest non-polemical layer of the Rephaim myth was lost in the ancient classical and late classical Near East, with only the Hebrew Bible and its expositors as evidence for the nature of these beings. Thankfully, with the discovery of the Bronze Age Ugaritic and Phoenician text, along with a much better...
So what's to say? It's we'im, and if petach, and if open, like I'm guessing if you open.
If you open the coffin,
tiftach, or if you certainly open, what's that? Alate. I'm not sure. With regaz and plunder. Teru.
Targozan.
Yeah, Targazan. You will certainly be cursed. Or wait, no. If you if you plunder, there's certainly plunder. You plunder to you plunder the yakon
means you will.
Oh,
means that this is it's the future participle.
Oh, okay, yeah. You will. Lach for you. Zara, like you for your seed, I think.
Yeah, for your offspring.
Yeah, for your seed. B'chaim, in the life of the others of your seed, or in the life. B'chaim. What's this? Tachat shemesh. For you or for oh my god. For the seed.
Under the sun.
Yeah. In life, of life that is under the sun. The mashkav.
Mashkab.
What's that?
Wamashkab. Oh, Shkab.
It's
I just remember what that means.
Bepam.
It's
Rephaim. Oh,
you will dwell with the Rephaim.
Interesting. Oh, Shachav, yeah. Right, duh. Shachav.
Their
Interesting.
set of tools for understanding the literary and historical construction of the Hebrew Bible, we finally have a pretty good idea of the origin, nature, and convoluted fate of the Rephaim. This episode would have been impossible without the absolutely wonderful study of the Rephaim by Jonathan Rogev. He systematically explores every single mention of the Rephaim known to history in the original languages, along with even slightly adjacent material that may bear on the overall subject matter. This is just the kind of scholarship that I honestly admire and adore. Go and you know what's coming. Yeah, it's published by Brill. So you too can descend into the afterlife of poverty by buying a copy. Fun. Also, if you'd like to read some of these great myths from ancient Ugaritic, from ancient Canaan, the best and affordable. Hear that, Brill? Affordable. Is that a word that you know? The best and affordable collection is by Coogan and Stories from Ancient Canaan. It's really wonderfully accessible with a great introduction covering virtually all of the texts that I've mentioned in this episode. So go read some Canaanite literature. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge. Thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
Interesting. So,
Give your Maymal a kiss.
yeah, it's interesting the parallels that you can find. Definitely. So that's probably a good place to wrap up.
Yep. And if you can send me, well, I think you'll be able to download the file. It'd be nice if you could. What would be the way to send a file this large?
Honestly, it would probably just be better for you to. Oh, we can talk about it after.
Okay, cool.
All right. So, let's see. To end it off, let's see. Honestly, maybe just same thing as before.
I'm a sexy Maymal.
אלוהינו לקי נברך, אלוהינו לקי נהלל, אלוהינו לקי נגדל, אלוהינו לקי נסעק, אלוהינו לקי נרומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי. אלוהינו לקי נברך, אלוהינו לקי נהלל, אלוהינו לקי נגדל, אלוהינו לקי נסעק, אלוהינו לקי נרומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי, אהיה שערי, אלוהינו לקי נברך, אלוהינו לקי נהלל, אלוהינו לקי נגדל, אלוהינו לקי נסעק, אלוהינו לקי נרומם, אלוהינו לקנודי ונשתבי, אהיה שערי. Mahalo, Elohim, Gadol Elohim, Messiah, Nishtabi, Ladon Kalula, Yahweh al-Afkar, Yibami. Elohim lakina barer, Elohim lakina halal, Elohim lakina jabal, Elohim lakina sahar, Elohim lakina roman, Elohim lakina mishtabi, yeshabi, Elohim lakina barer, Elohim lakina halal, Elohim,